It's a little noisy to film over here. Look at that. Have you ever wondered what happens to the juvenile salmon when they get to the estuaries? We often think about survival of juvenile salmon in rivers, as well as adult salmon in the ocean before they come back to rivers. But very rarely we actually talk about the survival of juvenile salmon once they get to the estuaries, which is a very, very harsh environment. Juvenile salmon migrate down the river in the springtime, and they have to face this massive amount of fresh water coming down due to freshet. The water is brown, is turbulent, and then once they get to the estuaries, they have to go through this transition from freshwater to saltwater, which is really hard on the body. Meanwhile, they have to face all these predators. You got herons sitting on the riverbank waiting for them. You got different kinds of predator fish, like bull trout, cutthroat trout, sculpin, bigger trout, bigger salmon in the ocean waiting to eat them. And on top of that, we're not making this much easier for them either. We've been building over the estuaries by channelizing the river, by creating dikes for flood control, and we also dredge the river for big ships to come in. So as a result, this becomes a really, really harsh environment for juvenile salmon. And just how exactly all of these impact the survival of juvenile salmon in the estuaries? Well, we're going to find that out today. So joining me is Dave Scott from Raincoast Conservation Foundation, and we're going to be heading out to the estuaries and talk about some of the research that they have been doing and some of the changes that they've been doing to make the survival better for juvenile salmon.
We're here on the North Arm jetty doing some sampling, looking at juvenile salmon use of the north arm of the river. So we just got out here. It's a nice sunny May afternoon, and we just did a beach seine set along the North Arm jetty here to try to get an idea of what species are just kind of in the area right now and coming down the river, so that we can also do some sampling at our restoration project here and get an idea of which fish are using the project area. This is a Chinook, and you can see that it's missing its adipose. So this is probably just released a few days ago, probably from the Chilliwack hatchery. It's a pretty safe bet based on the size that it is for the time of year, that it's kind of too small to be stream type smolt that would be coming out in its second year, and it's kind of too big to just be a wild ocean type Chinook. So it's a pretty good indication that it's a hatchery fish with or without the adipose. You can see this Chinook is quite a bit smaller. You can actually see its par marks a bit better than the hatchery one as well. So pretty good indication that it's just kind of coming out of fresh water now and making its way into the estuary and then slowly out to the ocean. So this is probably a wild Chinook from the Harrison River or potentially from the South Thompson, but for this time of year, most likely from the Harrison. And so yeah, we catch a lot of these little guys using the estuary on their way out to the ocean. So at these really small sizes, this one is about 5.5 centimeters. So this fish would be like probably about 4 months old or so. Yeah, so this would be like a sub-yearling coming out in its first year. They kind of show up in the estuary kind of between 3 and 4 centimeters, and then stay in the estuary till they're about 6 centimeters and then make their way out to the ocean. Whereas the fish that are coming out in their second year of life, those ones from the upper Fraser and the middle Fraser, they pretty much take up this whole viewer. This would be a Chinook that's a 1.5-year-old. So this would be a yearling fish making its way out. So this would be from one of the stream type populations in either the Thompson or the upper or middle Fraser likely. So as you can see, it's a lot bigger than your sub-yearling fish that's coming out in its first year of life. So with these ones as well, we find them coming through just around freshet time. We don't see them staying in the estuary for too long. They typically make their way through pretty quickly. You can see though that it still has those really nice par marks. So it's not that silvery yet. So it's still kind of making that transition to being a smolt on its way down to the ocean. And then once it gets a bit further out, you'll see pretty quick after that it'll really silver up and you'll lose all that nice coloration that you see there. in the Fraser Estuary, there's a lot of different things that impact the way that salmon can use their habitat. And one of those things is the presence of jetties and other structures. So we've been working to try to create some openings in some of the structures that are in the estuary, such as the North Arm jetty here, as well as the Steveston jetty down to the south in the main arm. And so our goal is to really allow juvenile salmon to try to move around the estuary in a more natural way and to not get pushed out of the estuary by these structures. So we want juvenile salmon like these sub-yearling Chinook and chum, these really small fish that are coming out in their first year of life. We really want them to be able to stay in the estuary and use the estuary habitats that they rely on before they get a little bit bigger and before they're really able to go to the ocean and be successful. So part of that is just allowing them to move around a little more naturally, and also allowing them to kind of move through the salinity gradients a little bit more naturally. So all of these structures, they make some pretty hard gradients between the freshwater in the river and the ocean water. So we want juvenile salmon to be able to use the area the way they would have naturally and slowly acclimate to that saline water as it gets saltier and saltier as they're ready for it. Back in kind of the early winter of 2022, we created this opening here. And so we're planning on creating another opening a few hundred meters upstream this fall. And then after that, we're pretty happy that we've kind of created a couple of different new ways for juvenile salmon to move around a little more naturally. So with the 3 breaches we've made in Steveston and 2 here, we're hoping that that's starting to make a big difference. As well, there's some other projects that Metro Vancouver and some other folks are looking at in this area to really start to kind of turn things around for salmon and really restore both habitat and access to those habitats. We're trying to create some openings so that juvenile salmon can stay in the estuary if they so choose to do, instead of getting really pushed out to the Strait of Georgia before they're potentially ready to go. So right now the tide is rising, but the river is flowing out, so it's not super strong flow on the out. But when the tide is dropping, we get a pretty nice strong flow. But I think those little fish, by just creating these openings, they're just going to kind of get washed into better areas than they would if they were just getting, flushed right out to sea. Right now, we're just kind of processing all our fish and just measuring our juvenile salmon for a few different reasons. So we want to get an idea of, just what the juvenile salmon that are using the site, so how big they are, what species they are, and then if we can, take some genetic samples. So with coho and Chinook at this size, it's really hard to tell the difference between them. Their par marks, you can see, are just kind of getting silver now, and they're very similar looking. So one of the things that you can look at is the anal fin shape. So if it's straight, then it's a Chinook, and if it has more of a sickle shape, like that one there, then it's likely a coho. So I think this is actually a coho smolt. This is a juvenile sockeye, pretty similar looking to a chum. It has like just these small par marks that are kind of more centered around the lateral line and more irregular. And of course, most sockeye that are migrating to the ocean are moving out at a lot bigger size than this. So this is kind of the uncommon strategy that we see mostly just with Harrison sockeye that are doing something similar to chum and going out in their first year of life. Whereas most sockeye are what are known as lake type, so they have a nursery lake that they spend a whole year in fresh water before moving to the ocean. So these are 2 fish that are super common in the lower Fraser, more in the freshwater area. So this is a peamouth chub. It's more of a freshwater fish. It's actually a true minnow. So when people say that small fish are minnows, this is actually a minnow. So this peamouth, it's riding the freshet down, really kind of staying in the areas that are more fresh. And then once the freshet ends and it becomes salty down here, these peamouths will move back upstream into the river. Whereas here, this 3-spine stickleback is actually anadromous. So you can see that it has these armored plates here. You can kind of see them glint in the sun. And so basically this stickleback can go to the ocean and then come back into freshwater to spawn, and it can take advantage of both environments. So from out in the eelgrass to upstream in a kind of farmer's ditch, you find these three-spined stickleback are probably the most abundant fish species by far in the lower Fraser. Tiny, tiny staghorn sculpin. The shrimp are bigger than. See, this is just a pretty small flounder whose eyes are just starting to rotate as well. And we started this work in 2018 was the first breach that we had made. So we're just kind of getting to the first year class returning after that. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to really know, just because we made a few breaches, is that what makes the variation in the returns that we see? But we're pretty hopeful that by working on a suite of projects, working on these connectivity projects, we're also looking at some other habitat restoration work, and working with some organizations to kind of try to tackle a lot of different problems for salmon in the estuary at once, to really try hopefully to allow them to stay in the estuary longer, get bigger, and be more successful in the ocean, and hopefully do better.
Right, thank you, Dave, for all the information provided today, not only on the fish species, but on all the projects that you've done in the last few years. That was fantastic, very useful stuff.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Always happy to have people come out and see the work that we're doing in the estuary.
Yeah, I just think people don't really realize, not just anglers, but just general public don't realize how important the estuary habitat is for juvenile salmon. It's so microscopic, right? Everything we saw was so small, you wouldn't see it unless you're sampling these fish like what we did today. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the estuary is where all the fish have to come through on their way out to the ocean, right? So we get all these different species from all these different populations in the Fraser. So we hope that that gives us a really good bang for our buck on our restoration.
Yeah, what really amazed me was we did a little sampling in this tiny little area, and yet we have so many fish in the net. Just like they use up the entire habitat.
Yeah.
Just, imagine if we create more habitat, just how many more fish we would get in the future, right?
Definitely, and I think that would allow them to go out in a bit better competition if they didn't have to compete so much while they were in the estuary on their way out.
Yeah, awesome. So if people want to find out more information on what you do, where can they go? Is there a website they can check out? And
you can check out our website. It's just www.raincoast.org/connectivity for this work. And then you can. I'm also at UBC with the Pacific Ecology and Conservation Laboratory there, so you can check out the work of Scott Hinch's lab and all of my great lab mates as well.
And we'll make sure we do more videos like this to keep the anglers educated. So awesome. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yep.